swear one of them was like, man, wouldn't this be cool with a command line interface? And I laughed and I was like, yeah, right. And then all of a sudden I stopped and I was like, wait a minute.
I am joined by Tim Keenan of Misfit Attic, and today we're going to talk about Duskers. So, to get things started, why don't you give us the convention pitch for Duskers in your own words?
So I guess the one-liner was always, you pilot drones into derelict spaceships to try to figure out why everybody's dead. Uh, and which completely glosses over a lot of things that a lot of people, love about the game. That it has a command line interface, that it is a roguelike, that it's sort of a real-time strategy, that it's sort of a squad-based game, that it's this, and you can see why I don't go into these things, because you kind of go down a rabbit hole when you start to explain this game. Which was really funny because at the beginning I remember not having like a solid elevator pitch, which everyone's always like, oh, you need the solid elevator pitch, right? And I don't know, something happened with Duskers. There was a nerve that was tweaked where like I stopped worrying and caring so much, as you can kind of see, like what a weird game it is. I stopped kind of worrying about a lot of that stuff, and so like even with the pitch, I was just like, I don't care. Like I was like, I'm making a game that is different and interesting, and hopefully people will find that, and I'll figure out the pitch later.
I think that's a pretty reasonable pitch, though. And you touched on one of the things that, for me personally, was one of the most interesting things, and that's the command line, and the fact that all of your input as the player is being done through this command line to these drones. I was wondering kind of how, if that was kind of one of the core mechanics you built the game around, or if it's something that came in later, and what kind of challenges you ran into in building that into the game and testing that with people and seeing how people responded to that.
Right. Yeah, it definitely wasn't part of the initial design. I think maybe in my initial design I was trying to be different, and maybe I was trying to make it so that it would be hard to pitch to publishers. I don't know, but I wasn't I wasn't trying that hard. So I didn't start and be like, I want to make a game with a command line interface. Though ironically, in 2016, this is not as crazy as it was. You've got Hacknet and Quadrilateral Cowboy.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other games that have jumped onto that.
Right, and so it's really weird because like back when I was developing it, it was just like, this is absolutely nuts, and then I found Quadrilateral Cowboy, and I was Brendan's awesome, and I asked him some questions about that, but like that was like my only thing I could latch onto, and then all of a sudden like Hacknet came out, and I was like, whoa, and now all of a sudden it seems like there's not like a deluge of them or anything like that, but there's certainly more than in 2015. But yeah, so that wasn't part of the plan at first. And then I was literally, I think I was at Tig Jam, like kind of prototyping this game because I had the idea. And then all of a sudden, uh, I walked over, and this is like a debate. Alex Austin, who made Gish, and now he's making Sub Rosa, and he's made a whole bunch of games. And Ian Stalker, who is made a Scapegoat and Soulcaster. They were both sitting there, and I walked over, and I was showing them the game. And I swear one of them was like, man, wouldn't this be cool with a command line interface? And I laughed, and I was like, yeah, right. And then all of a sudden I stopped, and I was like, wait a minute. Both of them claim that didn't happen. so
Conflicting reports.
It'll be forever a mystery, I suppose. But yeah, so then once I decided that I was going to do that, we kind of went all in on it, as you kind of have to. That's a really kind of shit or get off the pot kind of moment, right? Like, so I added it in to see if what that would feel like, because we were definitely going for like a low tech vibe. I was thinking like, sort of like Millennium Falcon, or Cowboy Bebop, where like even though you're in this sexy future, like a lot of this stuff just doesn't work. It's kind of like how back in, I don't know, maybe back in the 60s, they'd be like, oh my God, if you lived in 2016, everything would be like shiny and sleek and amazing, and we have like really crappy cars on the road, right? I mean, like you've got this mixture of stuff, so it's like I always kind of wanted that, and then all of a sudden with the command line, it really added to that. And as the game grew, so many of the game's elements were both influenced by and made stronger by the command line.
Mm.
Um, like we started going with this whole like thing of technology and like being isolated by technology and being empowered by technology and kind of the duality of that.
Mm.
And all of a sudden you're sitting here with this command line and you're like, man, it's awesome because I can like string these commands together to make these drones do these things, but I have to speak in this weird language to them. And then they can't respond super quickly because I've got to like issue commands and I've got to divert my attention between them. And so it's like this moment where this technology is enabling you to, explore this derelict ship, but it's also like constraining you because you can't just tell someone like if you see something bad, run. Um, like if
You can't do
something
that.
no, if something
You've got to
starts like
spell it correctly.
yeah, if something starts eating their face, they're just sitting there being like, I guess my operator wants my face to get eaten because he would have done something different if he hadn't wanted this. I mean, it's the classic programmer thing, right? You forget like a semicolon or whatever,
Right.
and like the machine does exactly what you told it to do. So it's like even though you're mad at it, it's just like a
It's just
big dumb puppy.
it's following
Yeah.
orders.
I think that this was another reason that people got so attached to the drones. That was another thing I was really trying to do is not anthropomorphize them, but make it so that the player would. Because
Mm.
I knew that if they did it and then they realized they were doing it, they'd be like, wow, I'm crazy. Because this is just a machine. Like originally I wanted it to respond like R2D2, you'd tell it to do something and it would argue with you, but that gave it autonomy.
Right.
And I knew as soon as I gave it autonomy, you weren't crazy if you had feelings for this machine. But if I never gave it autonomy and it only did the things you wanted to do, but I gave it a name and I made it beep and stuff like that, like with a call sign, that's it, responding call sign, but that would give it personality and then you would imbue it. Then you would be like, I am crazy.
That's cool.
And that's the thing is that I think the fact that they do exactly what you tell them to do makes people feel more guilty, right? Like if you and I are playing Dota and like we screw up, like we hate each other, it's your fault. It's totally your fault, like, not on me. But if you've got like a little drone that's just like, you told me to go to room 6, you said I assumed it was safe, and now I'm dead. It's like I killed.
That weighs heavy on you.
Yeah, like I told him to go there. I said it was safe, right? Yeah, it's like it's kind of like I guess it's like a puppy, right? Like where it's just like it kind of doesn't know any better, and you told it to do something, and then when things go wrong, you feel guilty.
Yeah. You also kind of touched on something that I wanted to. It was something that in our review I kind of pointed out, and I still think that Duskers is one of the best examples of a marriage of atmosphere and mechanic, because this mechanic of the command line perfectly serves the atmosphere you're placed in, where you are, in the game at a computer commanding these mechs, these little drones. But the other thing that this does, and especially just coming off of Halloween, I wanted to touch on this, was the sense of horror that it creates, where literally I have never been more afraid to spell something incorrectly at points in Duskers. That element of horror in Duskers, how much of it was what you were aiming for, and how much of it was a byproduct of this command line mechanic?
So what's really interesting is when I first made the prototype, it was just boxes and a headlamp on the front of it with a number on it, and you would go through these cubes. And I had a friend, Randy O'Connor, who does some of the artwork for some of the Tiger style stuff. He also worked on a Scapegoat with Ian. He was playing it, and he got off of it. He'd been playing it for like 2 or 3 minutes, and he was like, his shoulders and everything was just rigid, and he was like, I can't believe how tense I feel right now. He's like, I like this. He's like, but I have to stop playing right now because I'm feeling so tense. And it was amazing because it was just a box and a headlamp, and because the game was slow and because it was kind of methodical and because like you spent like 90% of your time and nothing was going wrong, and you didn't know exactly what was on the other side of the door, it like really, really started to get to people. So I started to realize right then that, yeah, like the game was going to be survival horror, but it wasn't going to be a traditional survival horror game. Like I feel like a lot of them, and I mean, there are some great survival horrors that you really use tension. Like, I mean, back in the day, Fatal Frame, like really messed me up. But I feel like a lot of games do definitely use the jump scare, and like it definitely feels more like a um, gruesome horror movie, I guess.
Mm.
And I wanted it to be more subtle than that, and I wanted it to be this slow burn, and I wanted it to be more about the fear of the unknown. Like none of these creatures. There is one accidental jump scare in the game. There is one enemy that happens because we didn't even intend it that way. Someone just messed a variable up and made him move like way faster than I had anticipated. And I was like, "Whoa, that is awesome!" Um, but we didn't want. I didn't want to have a lot of jump scares. I wanted that tension. I wanted you to feel like constantly like under duress, and this is exactly why I didn't make it turn-based. And this is exactly why I didn't add the pause that like FTL or something like that would have.
Mm.
Even though like in a strategy game that's kind of nice to have, because I knew that if I took my foot off that very slow gas pedal, that you could breathe.
Yeah.
And so because it's just that, it's just because if something's going wrong that you have to respond, and you don't know if something's going to go wrong. I think that creates all this tension, and I think that's like really cool, and that's really why we get all the I think the analogies with the look, but to Alien,
Mm.
um, that's it. I think that movie, like the first Alien movie, was just a slow burn, and it was just you knew something was going to happen, and it's almost like you're at the point where you're like, I just want it to happen,
Right.
It's
I
like
mean,
waiting in line for the roller coaster. You just kind of want to be on the roller coaster because your stomach is churning.
yeah, there's so much of that movie that nothing happens in, and it's kind of the same way in Duskers. Most of your time, nothing's there, but you feel that dread. You feel that.
Yeah, because you just don't know when everything's gonna go to hell, right?
Right,
Uh,
exactly. Cool. Well, that's some really interesting insight into the background of Duskers. But the other side of what we want to learn is a little bit more about you. So, what is your story? How did you come to be in independent game development?
so my first job out of college ended up being at Rainbow Studios, where I did AAA game dev,
Hmm.
for like PlayStation 2 and Xbox. And then that was a little bit rough. It was very fun. I loved doing it, but the hours were brutal and the pay was low and all that kind of stuff. So I ended up leaving and going to film for about 10 years. So I went to DreamWorks Animation, worked on like Shrek 2 and How to Train Your Dragon and Madagascar and all sorts of stuff like that. And that was kind of a better lifestyle, because
Mm.
the dream, especially when you're an animation studio, it's not like live action effects. It was kind of a slower burn, and like I worked mostly 40, 50 hour week and really cool people, but I always loved games, and
Mm.
they always were so interesting to me in the fact that they just have every problem. It's like, it's like you need visuals, you need audio, and all the stuff that you need in a movie, but then they're interacting with it,
Right.
right? So you have all these really interesting problems, in technology and all that kind of stuff. So I always wanted to go back to it. And then when XNA was around, and all of a sudden you could develop on like a retail console and stuff like that, it sort of was the advent. It was the rebirth of indie. Indie was never dead. I mean, it
No.
was going on that whole time, but it was sort of. I felt it was the rebirth of like the sort of you know, garage based like game company where
Mm.
like you and like one other person or even by yourself in some instances could just do this thing and get it out to market like a real marketplace like
Mm.
Xbox Live Arcade. Um, and Steam was becoming more and more viable. So that's when we saved money and I quit my job. And then my wife actually helped with the artwork for A Virus Named Tom. That was our first game,
Mm.
and I always joke that I was father of the year that year because or husband of the year because she was still working a full-time job doing the art for my game, and we had a baby. So it was a lot. I have people ask like what was going on then, like how we did that, and I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea. And that was that. And then A Virus Named Tom kind of put us on the map. We
Mhm.
got in a humble bundle, and that got a lot of love. And we got a Sony deal to put that on Vita. And then Duskers came along, and I pitched that, and we got indie funded, which was amazing. Um, and then we launched that, and it got a ton of critical acclaim, and it actually sold, which is a new thing for an indie game developer. So yeah, so things have been on the up and up for a while now. I I think I'm relatively good at this like indie game dev thing. It's super stressful. It doesn't pay as well. uh, the hours can be nuttier, but it's really fulfilling to create a product and have people talk about it and then point to something and be like, oh yeah, well that was my idea, and oh yeah, that's my wife's artwork or my friend's or whatever. Um, so yeah, that's sort of the quick and dirty version of it.
Perfect. So what were some of the games that informed your your interesting games? What were some of the standouts in your library, so to speak, um, that were inspirational?
I mean, I guess at the root of it, a lot of the games that I played when I was younger were very influential on me. I mean, like the Zeldas of the world, and even ActRaiser, and just a lot of those things just imprinted on me. And then as I grew, I kept playing games, and I went through different phases. I went through a big PC game phase when I was younger, so there was a lot of adventure games there and
Hmm.
RTSs. And then you get into college and then you have a girlfriend and stuff like that. And all of a sudden it's just like you don't want to be on the computer all the time. So I moved on into the living room
Right.
and was more of a console gamer. So then, my Zelda started becoming, Elder Scrolls like
Hmm.
Oblivion and Skyrim. And, I started getting into some more of the action games, um, and, I don't know. I guess I really like a lot of genre games. And then what's beautiful is that since I've become an indie dev, suddenly my eye has gone toward other indie devs because
Mm.
I meet them. I'm like, oh, that's a cool game. Or I'm also like on my PC playing my game, and I feel like a hypocrite if I'm not playing others. So I started playing PC games again, and now I can hook it up to my TV easier. And there's big picture mode and all that stuff. So all of a sudden, I'm playing like all sorts of genres and all sorts of games that never would have might not have ever been able to exist before. And you've got all these crazy creators doing things like that are just kind of like I'm sitting here and I'm playing like Analog a Hate Story, right? Which is like, an interesting game that's very much about reading logs, right? Um, and I'm playing something like Kingdom, where you got
Hmm.
this side-scrolling kind of like 4x light, and then you of course have your civilizations, and you have, I mean, there have been a lot of games now that I had an itch that I wanted to scratch with, I guess you would maybe call them simulation or city building or 4x or whatever you want to call it. Um, and I wasn't able to scratch it for some reason. And then along comes Factorio
Yep.
and RimWorld
Hmm.
and all these things where it's just like, I needed that. So, I mean, it's an amazing time, I think, to be inspired by games because there's so many different types, I mean, you'll sit there, those are more traditional, I guess. And then you'll look at like a Her Story or like, you know, uh, something like Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes,
Yeah.
or even Quiplash, like a party game like that. Like, I mean, there's just so much variety and so much stuff to draw from. I used to worry that like sometimes if I played too many games, that my games would be more derivative because I, just couldn't help but steal ideas from them. But there's just so many games out there
This.
and so many ideas that it's just like it I don't know, it's insanity right now. It's really great to be a consumer.
That's true. That's true.
It's a little tough to be a dev.
Um, with that in mind, pretty good segue. Are there any particular indie developers or indie games out there that you'd like to kind of shout out that you think people might have missed? You mentioned a couple already, but any others?
Um, that is a really good question. Things that people might miss. Yeah, I mean, I think that like if you're interested in games for the sake of like understanding new and interesting stuff, I do think that like Her Story does a lot with something simple and elegant,
Mm-hmm.
just like sort of Paper Please did. Um, I think that if you liked Duskers, I think there's a game called Capsule, that Adam Saltzman did, with Robert Arnott. And again, it gives all the atmosphere and that feeling, in a sort of a more subtle way than Duskers. It's certainly very different than Duskers. It
Mm.
doesn't have as much of the strategy elements. Um, but it's certainly something that I used as reference a lot when I was making Duskers and looking at that. Um, but I mean, I guess it just depends on genres that you like and the things that you're sort of into, right? Um, yeah, there are so many. amazing games. It's really hard to pick out like, and even like, you know, studios, because studios just become almost like people right now, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's like it's hard to be like, oh, this studio. But I mean, so many amazing developers that do so many amazing things. I love Alexander Martin and the stuff that he does. I sat down with Starseed Pilgrim and I gave up on it, and then a friend was like, no, 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 keep playing it, and I went back to it, and I was like, wow, that's really cool, and like I love talking to him and hearing some of his ideas, so I'm excited to see what he comes out with next. And then there's stuff that comes out of nowhere, right? With like, you know, I mean, I sit here in this sort of bubble of an industry, and you think it's like tiny and incestuous, and it is to a degree
Mm.
because there's only so many. But like anyone can sit there and pick up, you know, at least pick up something like Unity or Unreal and start farting around.
Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden you get like, I swear, like I assumed when I went to the Mega Booth the year that we did of Our Same Tom, I went back the next year to just sort of hang out, and I thought like it'd be all the same people. And it was like maybe there was like, you know, 15% of people I had seen before, and the rest were all brand new people with brand new games that I'd never heard of.
There's a lot of indie developers out there. There's a lot
Yeah,
out there.
it's amazing in the sense that you can find all this really new stuff, and like, you know, I'm walking around and I'm seeing all these really cool, exciting, interesting things. It's also like to be, you know, that's all the positive, and then to be negative in the back of your head, you're like, oh my God, like I have to compete.
Right.
And you're not
That's
really
true.
competing. You're not competing with any one of them. It's not really that way, and it's a really good community, and they're very supportive and stuff like that.
Mm.
You just think that like,
There's
you know,
only
the eyeball,
so many hours
yeah,
in a day for somebody to play
only so
games.
many hours in a day, and also like the quality that these people are putting out is like amazing. It's like it's good. It forces me to up my game, but I'm like, oh man, like I really can't take any shortcuts on this.
It's true. It's true. Well, Tim Keenan, thank you for giving us a little insight into the development of Duskers and for telling us a little bit about you and your journey as an indie dev.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm a big fan, and you guys were, like I said, you guys, I feel like were one of the first to drop with a review of Duskers, because there was kind of like a sort of silence period at the beginning. We really relied on word of mouth,
Mm.
uh, and so like, you know, at the very beginning there wasn't a whole lot of it. And so when you guys at least dropped the review and I was able to see something, I'm like, someone likes the game.